Good morning, good afternoon, maybe even good evening for those of you that are tuning in from around the world. My name is Michael Hebb, and we are back with my dear friend, Dr. Sylvia Perez Proto. Thanks for being here again, Sylvia.
Hello, thank you for restarting this amazing forum to share news about how we can take care of patients better, our family members better at the end of life, and plan our own, funeral sometimes. So that's great.
Yeah, we took a little bit of a summer break, and we're back. This is our 7th session. And I'm the founder of EOL.community and the founder of Death Over Dinner. Sylvia will give you a little bit of background on her work in a moment. The focus of this series is to bring to light and feature technology solutions that really make our lives better and the lives of our loved ones better around end of life, around serious illness management, memorialization, and grief. And we realize that clinicians are very busy and don't have the time to do the research to find the new solutions that are available to them. And some of these solutions are events that are online digitally, like we have Tracy Wheeler from Endwell with us today. And some of them are very simple PDFs that are available online. Olivia Barham is with us to talk about her remarkable death directive and also some of her work with home funerals. And then we get some very much fully tech solutions. We have a bit of a tape from the artist Dries DePorter, who has created a couple of remarkable apps and one new very provocative clock called Short Life. And so we're going to hear from Dries. And yeah, so and then we'll all have a discussion together. Before we get started with our panelists, Sylvia, tell us what's going on at the Cleveland Clinic. These are wild times. You probably just went through a pretty intense summer. I'm wondering how the hospital is doing, how the clinic's doing. Has Delta started to wind down? And then just anything else that you want to tell us about Cleveland Clinic Life.
So thank you, Michael. So I am Sylvia Perez Proto. I'm an intensivist and anesthesiologist, and I work at the Office of Patient Experience as the director of the End of Life Center. So part of my work has been in the ICUs, and yes, we have been seeing more patients with COVID, with the Delta, and we are still trying to explore what are the barriers for people to get vaccinated and help patients to understand, and people actually from our community to understand the value of getting vaccines. Actually, most of the patients I've seen with COVID right now are unvaccinated. And when they are here, they're asking us to get the vaccine, and we cannot give it when you are with the virus. So has been very rocky and difficult. But again, we are still having room here. We are not in the like 80% capacity or anything. We have full schedule in the surgical wall. So everything is looking good for now. And also we are working a lot on the end of life course that we are organizing. I will put the link in the chat if somebody wants to take a peek. We are starting in October. It's fully virtual and it's for South America and US, and it's going to be translated in 3 languages. So it's very exciting. We are going to finish with Death Over Dinners virtually with rooms in Spanish, in Portuguese, and English. So I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, and say more, who is the course for and what is going to be covered?
So the course is for end-of-life care in the ICU. So 20% of the patients who die in the US have been in the ICU or they die in the ICU. And there's very little, there's some things written in how we take care of patients at the end of life in the ICU, but there are many details that have not been widely guidelines or or adopted in different countries. So we want to offer our work, our experience, and in the chat every week we will get providers from different countries to share their experiences. So it's for ICU teams basically on how to take care of better of patients at the end of life.
Great. Well, I'm honored to be part of it, and I'm thrilled that it's in 3 languages, and you'll be reaching such a wide, diverse audience with this important work. So without further ado, we're gonna just jump right in, and we're gonna start with Dries de Porter, who's a Belgian artist who's living in Ghent currently. And unexpectedly couldn't join us this morning, and so really wanted to be involved and to share his work. And so we taped a quick conversation with Dries just the other morning. And so Jillian, if you want to cue that, and it's just 3 minutes long, and then I'm going to give you a little bit more background on Dries' work, because I think it's a very important contribution to this space. So Jillian, go ahead with the Dries video.
So my name is Dries de Porter. I'm a Belgian artist working with technology, and I'm currently based in Ghent. I make art about several topics. It's about surveillance, privacy, social media, machine learning, and I make them in all kinds of forms. So it can be an application and browser game, an interactive installation, or a product. I love to make them in all kinds of different forms. So a few years ago, I made an app, and it's called Die With Me. And Die With Me is an app which you can only use when you have less than 5% battery in your phone. If you have less than 5% battery in your phone, you can use the app, and then you end up in a chat room with other people having less than 5% battery on their phone. So in the chat room itself, it's one big chat room. So all people end up there with low batteries. You see each other's battery status, and they talk about sometimes about how they feel having a low battery. And yeah, you can also see if people have while they're charging their phone. So you can see a little thing on it in the chat room. We still update the app quite often. So like, for example, on Black Friday, we double the price of the app. So it's twice that expensive. Lots of people downloaded. We were more than 2 weeks #1 in the Apple App Store in the US. And I made it actually together with a friend, David Surprenant. And yeah, it was like, it's still a great adventure. It was, it's part of our income also now. And yeah, that's Die With Me, I guess. Also a few months ago, I released a new product, and it's actually a clock. It's called Short Life. And it's, yeah, it looks like a normal clock, but it shows you a percentage. And it's actually show how much of your life that is already completed in percent. So it's based on your life expectancy in your country. So if you order the clock in my web shop, you need to fill in your birthday, the country where you were born, and then you get it delivered at your house, and it's personal. So at the back, I write your name, and if you connect it, you see the percentage of how much of your life that is already completed. Yeah, so the product is called Short Life, a clock to remind you that life is short. That's on top of the clock. And yeah, that's my one of my latest projects, Short Life.
All right, so we're starting off on the lighter side. Dries does create these remarkable art projects that remind us that life is short, and also the humor of playing with technology, specifically with Die With Me. I'm gonna, just so people have a visual of these projects. And you know, Dries has had his work exhibited in MoMA, at South by Southwest, and Art Basel. So very significant contemporary artist who's taken a real interest in memento mori, or reminding people that we do have a short life. And I asked Dries, I said, so why, you know, why death? Why are you interested in this topic with your art? And he started to answer, and then he stopped himself and said, nope, I actually would prefer not to answer. He really wants people to explore these products, you know, without his own spin on it. So here's what short life looks like. That shows you the percentage using, I think, World Health Organization, you know, data based upon your zip code, or your the state that you live in, and your age. Obviously, isn't necessarily how long you're going to live or how long you have left, but it is that from a data perspective. So that's short life, and it, Dries.
As a scientist, I have a question. What happens when you are outliving the expectancy of life? It's going to say, hey, you are living extra 10%.
Definitely, it's just cherry on top. It's
oh, interesting.
Congratulations. But yeah, Dries offered, if we'll share the URL, but he offered everyone today a 10% discount on Short Life. EOL 2021 is your promo code. So if you must have one of these art objects, then you can. So here's Die With Me. And it, like he said, and sometimes you have to hear this a couple times to get it, the only time you can use this app is when your phone has less than 5%. You can actually pay extra to access it with 10% of life. But thousands, like hundreds of thousands of people have downloaded and used this app. And the chat room apparently is quite entertaining. Everyone's in it together. And I'll share this little video. Let me see, we'll play.
Everyone knows the struggle of a dying phone. Die With Me is an app you can only use when you have less than 5% battery. Die together in a chat room on your way to offline peace. Die With Me is now available in the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store.
Okay. Stop that. So that's Die With Me. I wish we had Dries with us to grill him a bit more, but we're going to change direction now entirely, and we are going to bring onto the stage our dear friend Tracy Wheeler. And for anyone who has ever spoken at, and many people have attended or partnered with the remarkable organization Endwell, which has been gathering people to think about how we can end our lives in a more powerful, beautiful, meaningful way with less suffering for many years now. If you have interacted with Endwell, you have probably interacted with Tracy Wheeler, who's the curator and the director of content, and has been there since the beginning. Sylvia and I both had an extraordinary experience, several for me, working with Tracy. So we're thrilled that you're here, and you have an exciting, controversial, provocative, meaningful experience and conference coming up that I'm thrilled that you're going to tell us all about.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. Oops. Thank you, Michael. Sylvia, it is wonderful to see both of you. And working with you made my life so much easier because you're both really super people to work with. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Endwell, and then a little bit about or a little bit more about our conference coming up. Bear with me while I share my screen. All right, so Endwell was founded in 2017 by Dr. Shoshana Ungerleider. Shoshana was a hospitalist physician at the time, and she was seeing far too many patients, mostly elderly, coming into the hospital and dying alone and in pain and in fear. And then she was meeting their families who couldn't understand how this could possibly have happened and how they couldn't, how they didn't know what choices might have been available to them and what decisions they might have been able to make. And so our work since then has been, along with other people like EOL, has been to really try to normalize these conversations and to really create a future where ending well becomes a measure of living well. So we really do see that everything involved with being alive sort of comes to a head towards end of life. And what we want is we want to work on developing a stronger foundation throughout life so that when we are in these tough situations and we have to make choices, we understand who we are and we understand what's available to us. We've had 3 in-person amazing events. And of course, we've now pivoted to being virtual and online for the time being. We have great hope that that will change. And we've had amazing people join us. We've had people like Esther Perel talking about relationships and intimacy at end of life. As I said, we try to cast a very wide net. We try to invite people into the conversation who may have thought, like Esther did at the time, that she really didn't have much to offer, when of course she has everything to offer about what it means to be alive and what it means to keep a relationship and to stay in touch with intimacy during times of serious illness and at end of life. We had Dr. Banku, who talked about how important it is to bring design into the medical school curricula, but also how important it is then to go out with that kind of design thinking and look at some of the sort of seemingly intractable problems that we're facing in healthcare. We have brought Alicia Garza, who talked about what it takes to build a movement, but she also shared for the first time that her mother died at the Zen Hospice Center in San Francisco. She was the last person to die there. And this really matters because Zen Hospice was an incredible example of excellent care in a hospice setting. And it died because of our challenges around funding in this country. We had Dr. Sunita Puri, who is amazing. If you don't know her yet, you should. She talks beautifully about the importance of language in medicine. And so much of what we're learning really boils down to how can we communicate differently? How can we help physicians and other providers speak more directly and compassionately about choices, about the scenarios that people are truly facing, and help them make good decisions? We had Blair Underwood, who joined us for last year's virtual event, Take 10, and he was joined by his brother and sister. And they talked about the differences between being a remote caregiver and an on-the-ground caregiver. And believe me, it's worth watching because in this conversation, we see Blair realize that he still doesn't fully understand the realities of 24/7 caregiving. We had these amazing people, Michael and Sylvia and Jonathan Bartels. And the reason that we brought, well, Michael back, we love Michael, but what was so amazing about this story is that it's about how we can start with a germ of an idea. Jonathan thought about what can we do better, and he came up with the idea of the pause that we take in a moment when a person has just passed away within the healthcare system. How do we honor that person and honor the practitioners, the people in that room who've just gone through this experience with them? And then Sylvia came and talked about the rigor and the genius that her team brought to thinking about how can we make this available and how can we know that it works? And then Michael helped us think about how do you then package this and get this out to the world? And then we had, on our very first conference, we had Dr. Tony Bossis. And this was in 2017. And Tony came and he spoke to us about psychedelics and psychedelic medicines and psychedelic therapies at end of life. Tony told us some really amazing things. He said that the research that was being done at NYU was showing that one dose of psychedelic medicines, albeit in a very, very long and thought out therapeutic container, was resulting in phenomenal decrease in existential distress, decrease in fear, and it was transforming people's relationship to the time they had left. And this sort of stuck with us. And so we thought this year, our 5th year, that we would take our efforts and we would focus for the first time ever on one topic, and that's psychedelics. And it's our hope that by shining a light on the promise and the perils of psychedelics, that these medicines and the movement surrounding them may help to further invigorate the conversation about what it means to live well through to the end. And this matters a lot. You know, I think we're all looking for ways to bring more energy, bring more hope into these conversations. So this year we are presenting The End in Mind, Psychedelic Medicines and Ending Well. It's on October 14th. I'll get to that in a little bit. The End in Mind has some amazing speakers. We have Van Jones, who's the CNN host and Dream Corps founder. And one of the reasons we brought Van, and then we have a bunch of other people, Melissa Etheridge, Ira Byock, Victoria Hale, Dingle Spence, Tony Bach, Francois Borzat, Julie Holland, Alex Belser, and many more. And all of these people, Melissa is a singer-songwriter who's gone through a lot in her life and deeply believes in the power of plant medicines. Ira talks to us about how end of life is its own stage of life. Victoria talks to us about developing and delivering sacred medicines through a nonprofit model. Dingle is one of the, well, she is pretty much the only palliative care physician in Jamaica. And she'll be talking to us about a retreat that was led for parents of children who had passed away. Tony Bach talks to us about clinician burnout and a study that he's going to be doing with psychedelics. Francois is the guide that was part of Dingle's study. Julie Holland has been doing amazing work around psychedelics medicines, and so is Alex Belser. And we have a lot more. We have people like Rick Dovlin. And so as a curator, what I'm really interested in is how do we enlarge the conversation enough so that a more general interest audience can begin to understand some of the things that people in healthcare know, and how can people in healthcare begin to reconnect with some of the lived experiences of people who aren't in healthcare. And one of the things that Rick, who is the founder of the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, he devoted his life to this from the time he was like 18 years old. One of the things that Rick has found as a therapist himself is that the denial of death that people think is part of fighting the disease may actually debilitate them. And the acceptance of death can lead to an appreciation for the joyous nature of the life that they do have. He's seen this with psychedelic medicines. Melody Hayes, who is an anesthesiologist, really believes that healing and transformation provided by psychedelic medicines can help us be in a new relationship to human suffering, to death, to mental illness, and even a new relationship to each other. And we all know that we probably need that right now. Steve Ross, who is one of the lead researchers for psychedelic medicines at NYU, says it very succinctly: these drugs are meaning-making medications. And then Rabbi Steve Leder, who we adore, sort of gives us the imperative. The question is whether or not we will use the ancient new tools we have to create a world in which all of us, including the dying, are able to live and die like we matter. So we would like to ask you to join us on September 26th. Go to endwellproject.org to learn more and to register. You can register after September 26th for asking for a very small donation after that point. So one of the things that, you know, really matters a lot to us as we do our work at Endwell is to find, as I said, new ways into these conversations. Michael is a genius at this. Sylvia has brought such beautiful joy to the work, and I think the way that she and her team imagine how to integrate the realities of the healthcare system into this new reality where we understand that we need to help people really physically know that they have options, they have choices, and they can talk to people who will listen to them. And I think that's my sort of plea for everybody watching is how can we all get better? How can we get better as patients? How can we get better at providers at knowing what we want and knowing how to help people get there? So that's pretty much it for me.
It's beautiful, Tracy, and it's so courageous and it's so needed. And you're doing it at just the right time. For those of you who are thinking psychedelics, mushrooms, LSD, MDMA, ketamine, and you know, Western medicine, we are about to see, and we'll talk about this more in the conversation, we are about to see these treatment models come online in clinical settings, completely legalized for clinical use across the board with dozens of therapies. And so we'll talk about it more. This is not a fringe topic anymore. This is happening. It is the future of a great part of pharmaceuticals. So I'm thrilled that you're putting a light on it because we're going to be reading about it and experiencing it for the next, hopefully, 100 and maybe 1,000 years. So I think it's essential. So we're going to now bring Olivia Barham up to the stage. Olivia has been this force of nature in the end of life space. I've often found when I'm working with somebody who's a great leader in the end of life space, whether it's a doula or a green burial expert, how did you get trained? And very often the answer is, well, Olivia Barham was my trainer. Was who educated me. And Olivia is a death midwife. She is a home funeral guide, an interfaith minister, and funeral celebrant. But we wanted to start today, that we're going to talk about some of Olivia's other work as well. But I asked her to start today with this remarkable piece of technology, this remarkable new thing in the end of life and dying space called a death directive. Olivia.
Thank you, Michael. What a pleasure it is to be here. I was very excited to watch Dries' work because it just brings our attention to the importance of recognizing that this is temporary, and to be in denial of it seems incongruous with having a great life. And me personally, the more I dwell upon, think about, plan for, teach, end of life, everything, the more in focus my life has become, the more precious it's become, the more exciting, if you will. So looking at the end of life certainly is not depressing and morbid. It's activating and energizing. And so I just want to say that ahead of time. So and thank you. So I'd just like to share a little bit about how I got into this, because I entered this whole end of life field as a home funeral guide. And that happened when I was with my mother. I helped bathe and dress and her body, and then it was taken away by the funeral home, which is what happens when somebody dies. And I recognized that I needed more time. And then to see her in a plastic bag taken out when I felt like I wasn't finished, and I didn't know exactly what it was I wanted to finish, but there was an emptiness, and it was an ache. And so that's where I leaned into this work. I wanted to investigate that, like what has happened here? Why does she have to leave? I needed more time. And that led me to my own training to become a home funeral guide. And for those of you who are not familiar with that, it's basically supporting the family in caring for their own loved one after they've died. So it's preparing their body, preserving their body, laying their body in honor for 1, 2, or 3 days, so that the family can fully exhale, absorb, and integrate the enormity of what happens when a loved one stops breathing. And each person, each family, each community has their very own unique individual experience of this. But everyone who has experienced it has expressed how profoundly healing it was, how they couldn't have imagined doing it otherwise, but we don't know what we don't know. And because it wasn't an option that was presented to them, they let it go. So I feel like the biggest part of my work is educating people to understand what their options are and how they can, if they choose, begin to investigate these opportunities that are going to happen, not just up until the last breath, which is the work as a death midwife, is to inform, support, guide them spiritually through the dying process. But after the last breath, then what? Because a lot of people, they anticipate, well, what's going to happen when I die? And that is where a lot of the fear comes in, the fear of the unknown. So when somebody can physically have this discussion with me about what's going to happen to my physical body, and I can share with them, well, we're going to bathe it, we'll dress it. Do you have something that you'd like to wear? And I'm just calling a spade a spade. We just say what's going to happen. But the rest of the family in the other room might be a little cautious about doing that. Nobody wants to imagine their mom in a coffin in their white dress, but I'm just chatting about it. Would you like the white dress or the purple dress? Let's look at the dresses in the closet. Tell me about this one. Is that something you'd like to wear? And in the discussion, we might really get to the point where they prefer a shroud. It makes more sense to them to not be dressed up. Well, I think I would like to just be naked. I came in naked and mom swaddled me. I think I'd like to go out naked. But it's hard to imagine these things without the conversations. So the death midwife, death doula, the guide is having these conversations and normalizing everything and allowing the person who's on their death journey to begin to imagine those next 3 days. We might decide where they're going to be laying in the house. Obviously, I talk about preservation of the body, the dry ice. We'll find a funeral home that can work with the family that is open to these sorts of things. And then, of course, the next piece is after you've been here for 3 days, or if that's not agreeable to the family who are going to hold the space for the 3-day vigil, then you'll be in a funeral home. And we get to talk about that too, so that they understand what's going to happen to this shell. And then we talk a lot about it being just a shell, because the who that I'm talking to is not the shell. So then that leads us to the who are you then if you're not the shell? And just like Anthony's work with the psychedelics, it's about bringing a sense of peace to the one who's dying, so that they can go, okay, I got this. I can receive my dying. This is not so terrifying now. You've filled in some of the blanks. And the psychedelics can do this in having this experience of something bigger than this. And I talk about it in giving them the space to relax, because they know what's going to happen to them, their physical body anyway. So we might talk about the home funeral piece, and then there's options for after death. Do you want to be cremated? So we'll talk about the cremation, what happens during the cremation process, perhaps where they would like their ashes scattered, what they want the ashes in. Do they want to help decorate their urn or their box? So the person who's dying gets to actively participate in this process. Stephen Jenkinson says it beautifully. He said, dying is not something that happens to you. Dying is something you do. So if it's something we do, if it's a verb, then we can learn how to do it well, which is why I like end well. We can learn how to do this. We need education. We need it to be a very normal conversation. And so in part of the learning how to do it well is knowing about all of the options so that you can make your own choices. I'm going to be the one who's dying. This is my body. I think I should be responsible for what happens to it. So if I'm choosing my 3-day vigil at home on dry ice with my family taking care of me, I might need to actually talk to these people and tell them what it's going to be like, ask them if they'd like to do it for me. And if not, can I find somebody who's willing to take care of my body, because I'm not going to be able to make sure it happens, right? So as soon as that person who's dying takes responsibility for the way they die and what happens to their body, they invite the broader conversation to family members who might never wanted to have this conversation. Mom, let's not talk about the coffin. Can we just talk about what we're going to do tomorrow? And mom goes, no, I insist. I want that coffin, or I want to have a sea burial, and I want my whole family and all of the relatives to get in a lovely boat and go out into the ocean and deploy my body into the sea. Now, a lot of people don't even know that full body sea burials are even an option. So there's another conversation. Yes, you could shroud my body, put weights in it, and take it out to sea. And everybody becomes involved. This is a community event. It's an opportunity for everybody to step into that liminal space of, she's not here. Who am I now? We're in this a very unusual space that happens after death, while everybody is being transformed in their own unique way to be something bigger than they were before the loved one dies. Because death can be a feast. We can, if we really lean into it and absorb it and digest all of the little nuances of it, we become more expanded, more connected, more aware of right now, which is Dries' work too. I've got 40%. I love that. And every day it's getting closer and closer and closer. Like, wow, can you feel the fear now? What is that invitation to do next in my life? It's fabulous to bring this close. It's a very activating thing, death. So these conversations, what am I going to do with my body? I'm going to have a home funeral. I'm going to have a shroud. I'm going to then be deployed in 6 miles out in the Pacific Ocean. I'm having my whole community take care of me. And then a year from then, let's have a great big party and everybody can have all of my possessions. This is what we speak about in a lot of my classes. And I teach the death midwife how to have these conversations, how to gently open this door so that the death journeyer feels safe enough to dare to imagine themselves in their shroud, on a massage table, or in a coffin, or at sea, and you can feel how they relax. So that's the goal of the work. And in the beginning, I've been doing it like 16 years now. Very often a family would call me because they wanted a home funeral, but they hadn't prepared anything. They hadn't really thought about it until they started going online thinking, what should we do with dad? And then they would call me to say, I think I'd like the home funeral. Can you come over? Now there's things to prepare. So that's what led me to create the Death Care Directive. And basically, this is a booklet. Everybody hopefully has a healthcare directive. That's the directive where you assign somebody to be your healthcare advocate, your power of attorney for healthcare. They're going to make the decisions about what happens to you up until the last breath. This is the Death Care Directive. This is everything from the point of the last breath right up until burial or cremation. And this is, quite an extensive little booklet. There are lots of questions to be answered. What I've touched upon right now are just a few things, and people don't want to talk about it. So I used to give the physical booklet like this, and people bought it, but now I put it up online. So you can take us, it's a much easier way to do it. And if you get the download, you can have a group meeting with your family, whereas everybody gets to answer the questions one at a time. And I suggest, like, this would be a great tool for death over dinner. Like, let's do our care directive and let it be fun. So when you open, the page that starts, I love my first, the page, page 6 is, when my body dies, I would like, and you get to pick, I would like this funeral home. I know that I would like this. I think I want my body given to science, so don't worry about a funeral home. And then to be able to share with your kids and your friends around the table, and you see how everybody's got a different take on this. Everybody wants something different. It's amazing. And you never have these normal conversations, but once you've written it down in the booklet, then when the time comes, everybody, they just have to look at it. Oh, look, she's written right here. She wanted that lovely piece of fabric that's in the bottom drawer of the dresser. Oh, and she wants this music. And oh, look at this. It just makes it so much easier. And sadly, a lot of us will die unexpectedly. So to know that your loved one has one of these in their death file, I also invite everybody to create a death file, and I share with them what are the documents that you need to put in it, along with the healthcare directive and the death care directive, so that when the time comes, your loved ones will, the only thing they'll have to do is to be with what's happening to them emotionally. And sadly, when you're ejected into this space of decision making and all of these options you now have to consider, and now you've got to find out about money, it's a distraction from being present to this huge event that just happened. So completing a healthcare directive and a death care directive is the kindest thing you can do for your family members. So I just can't express the importance of doing this.
It's a tremendous gift to give the people in your lives, and will change the way they grieve. And now we get to, we'll send a link for the video, Olivia, to folks, but we're running out of time. We have to go into Q&A portion of this. And I know that Sylvia has some questions for both Olivia and Tracy. And those of you that are tuning in, Bob Hoffman, our expert question asker, has already used the Q&A tab. Please fill that out if you have questions for us. Sylvia, kick us off.
Okay, so I will start with Tracy. In my experience as a physician, we are always about exploring, feelings, fears, goals, values, and then you have tools in your toolkit, right? Everybody needs different things, fear different things. I think this new chapter of psychedelics at the end of life is giving us more tools, especially with patients at home, because we can manage these medications here to help patients, die in the way that they want and connected with the family and calm and in this such a way. But sometimes when we are transferring the patient home, some of the things are very difficult. So I wonder, have you heard them talking about how these medications or tools are used in different settings? I wanted to explore that with you.
Sure. Currently, they're really only in clinical trials, and those trials are in therapeutic settings. There's hope, of course, that they can be rolled out into hospice, that they could be rolled and through hospice in the home. I think what's really interesting, and from what I understand, speaking to so many of the people doing these studies, is that what would profoundly change for you, for instance, would be if a person had psychedelic therapy because they were really stuck and having tremendous difficulty accepting that they were dying. You would, after they go through this, for most people, the vast majority, they get over that. So it would enable you to begin to have conversations and different conversations. And I think that one of the things that I hear from physicians and other clinicians is that when a person doesn't want to talk about something, how do you make them, right? And so this could be a huge benefit in that process. And then the toolkit that you already have becomes much more available to you. So, that's my short answer.
I love that. Actually, I had two patients last week, one in the ICU, the other in the floor, that the treating team told me he's not ready. He doesn't want to talk about it. And the patient was actually talking to us, don't transfer me while the Browns was playing. His goal was talking about the Browns, and he didn't want to talk about that. And that night he died. So yes, I think these tools are going to help us to treat better our patients and also decrease the stress on the family. I think it's amazing work that you are getting into. So thank you so much for taking us there. And also, to change culture that in the clinical world is very hard. So, and we rely very heavily on research. So I'm happy that this is starting in the research world in order to get to everyone. So
the trials are very rigorous, very rigorous. They weren't necessarily as rigorous in the 50s and 60s. And that was one of the issues, but they are extremely rigorous now. And then, of course, the hope would be that we don't have to pathologize. I think that's one of the things that people working in the trials and just in the space are a little concerned about, is that the only people who will be able to have access to these medicines will have a pretty, tough diagnosis of mental conditions. And that would limit us from offering them to people who are just having sort of normal freaking out about, wow, I was just told, or their families who might be actually more upset. So that's another kind of interesting angle.
Yeah, that's awesome. And Olivia, I want to get back to you. I think I always try to think these tools in the clinical setting. And we have spiritual care that actually help our patients navigate these spaces after patients die in the hospital. However, sometimes they also help the patients before when they are dying or help the loved ones. So I'm thinking how would be to bring these documents to the clinical setting, not only at home, because sometimes if they didn't happen at home, we can be the ones offering these tools in hospitals. So I'm wondering if you have some experience bringing these documents in the hospital stage, in the clinical stage.
Well, when I'm called bedside, very often it's into a hospital or a nursing home setting. When I had the physical version, I would take it with. It was something to do with the person. It's only been as a digital document a short period of time, so I'm curious now how that will work in the setting. My sense is could be even better because you could print it out. You can get it ahead of time, print out as many copies as you need, or perhaps take just a couple of the pages that pertain to something that you are willing or ready to talk about, which the whole document might be a little overwhelming. But I just want to take the one page about the funeral home that you would like to, and then you have a list of funeral homes, and then that might open the conversation about the different offerings that the different funeral homes have, and just do it very slowly. At the back of the book too, there are questions for the life review, which is a very powerful tool to help those people who might feel unresolved or that their life was pretty meaningless. Sadly, I talked to a lot who may have been, I was just a housewife my whole life. I didn't really do anything. And and then these questions that I've put in here would evoke them to really connect with, well, maybe I actually did make a difference. So absolutely, I would, I think it's a powerful tool. It's a helpful one, especially when people they just don't know what to say. Let's just look at page 6 and do that one, you know.
That's great. Thank you so much.
I think we might have a new project, Sylvia, working with Olivia to bring this into a clinical setting.
I know.
Certainly chaplaincy and palliative care. I think there would be some resistance from some palliative care departments, but I think chaplaincy and the chaplains in the spiritual care would embrace this beautifully.
Yeah.
So to be continued. What's going to happen there? I have a question for you, Tracy, and then we'll get to the Q&A box. What has the response been? What you've been talking to a lot of doctors, you've been talking to a lot of people, partners, and even corporate and healthcare partners. Has there been resistance to this idea, or have?
Stunningly, no. I mean,
Okay.
we've been talking to people who we, track conservatively, who are really into this. This is one of the few areas that seems to cross the aisle, that some of the funding for the studies is coming from, very conservative people, extremely liberal people. Of course, we're watching a world where they seem to be meeting, but that's a different conversation. Yeah, I think it's for 2 reasons. One is because we are really in search of new metaphors. Healthcare and medicine haven't really had the opportunity or been able to sort of catch up to how much the world has changed for all of us. And one of the astonishing things about psychedelics is that the people working in the space, whether or not they're actually using the medicines and have gone through any of this themselves, they have to work collaboratively, and they have to work kind of in a team. And even that, I think, alone is making people a little bit interested in, is this another way of working? It's a whole different sort of therapeutic modality that's taking the emphasis off the medicine and really going into the work and the integration and the communication. I think that in an interesting way, it seems to be the people who are probably in their 40s who are within healthcare, who are interested, but maybe the most skeptical, because that was when the hardcore war on drugs, this is your brain on drugs, the two eggs in the pan, really hit those people. And yet, because people in healthcare, are sort of science-driven, data-driven, the results are just phenomenal, and they just keep coming in from different sources. So no, I'm sure it will happen. The government's being, it's still a controlled substance. It's Schedule 1. So, that's tough. But we are seeing ketamine clinics open up and ketamine move more into the sort of common world.
Yeah, and in talking to Beckley Foundation and Paul Stamets and MAPS and Compass, there are treatment protocols using DMT, using psilocybin, using all of these things. They are going to be available to people in the next couple of years. And I think when a few of these are available at the clinical level, it just opens the door for more, and to treat PTSD and depression and addiction. And it's not just end of life where these psychedelic treatments are focused. I got a question.
I do think though,
Oh, go ahead. No, go for it, Tracy.
I was just going to say, I do think that because they're so effective, they allow us to open up a conversation. I think it's hard to talk about things that we can't treat or we can't fix, particularly as Americans. We like to be able to fix things. And if we can't fix it, we don't know how to talk about it. And I think that as it becomes clear that these medications can help with existential distress and anxiety and some of the things that aren't really well recognized at end of life, that we'll be able to begin to talk about that the whole complication around accepting that you're dying, around mortality, in a different way. And maybe everybody won't get this medication, but if clinicians feel that they can talk about it, that could change everything. I mean, I think about Viagra, right? That sort of changed the conversation and normalized erectile dysfunction in a way that nobody ever thought was going to happen. And I think that there's, that's sort of a joke, but when we think about anxiety, I think people see it as depression. They see it as a lot of other things, and they treat it that way. And those drugs are not necessarily what we want or people want to be on at end of life.
Yeah, absolutely. The halo effect can be huge. It's going to be exciting to watch. So we've entered lightning round. We only have 2 minutes left. So Olivia, I have 2 lightning round questions for you. One from Bob: what is the best local place to find an experienced home funeral guide to talk about an end-of-life plan? And then I have a quick follow-up question.
Well, the Home Funeral Alliance.org is a nonprofit that was started a long time ago. They have a directory of home funeral guides, depending on what state you're in. That's probably the best way to do it. Or Google Home Funeral Guide and your town.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's what I was going to say. And then the second question is, the beauty of a healthcare proxy is it is a legal document that somebody is going to be advocating for you, even against the wishes potentially of your family. Is the death directive a legal document? Is there a legal document? If it's not, that can make sure that people have their wishes fulfilled at the end of life, whether it's because oftentimes there is a disconnect between what the family wants, what the partner wants, what the domestic partner wants, what the person wants, etc. So very curious about that.
Well, that's a good point. The death care directive, in order to make it a legal document, I would have to do a separate document for every state. And there was just way too many hoops to jump through to do it 50 times in different ways. So it does have a page at the back for two witnesses' signatures that would prove that the person who wrote it was the mother. However, of course, it doesn't stand up in a court of law. So if you wanted it to be such, you would have to have it included in your written up in your legal trust or your will and have it stated that way. But you could easily do that too, and have the lawyer legalize it. Yeah.
Terrific. And that's something that is a concern for a lot of people. Well, this has been amazing, and I want to continue to explore all of these ideas. I'll definitely be at Endwell in the coming month. Thrilled that you're doing that. And Olivia, you already know that I love the Death Directive, and we're sharing it widely all of the time. Sylvia, thank you.
So, to say bye and thank you everyone for coming here today.
Thank you.
Right, bye everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Lovely to see you both.